Welcome everyone to the Park County Board of Education special meeting for this evening, the purpose which is to discuss the tentative budget for the next fiscal year. I'd like to welcome everyone who's here, and let's go ahead and stand and observe a moment of silence. Now the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item of business is adoption of the agenda.
I move that we adopt the agenda as presented.
Motion by Ms. Hicks. Second by Mr. Farrow. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 4-0 with Ms. Ritchie absent. All comments? Okay. And next up is item number 2, consider adoption of the 2017-18 tentative budget. Ms. Ryan and Dr. Bob Wagner.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you again this evening. We're going to talk about the tentative budget, and perhaps a good place to start is any questions that you have, just right off at the start of the meeting that you want to go through.
That's what you want to start with. Any questions?
Hey, this assigned and unassigned general fund, have we had that before?
No, ma'am, you haven't.
Okay.
What we're attempting to do, that shows up first on page 3. You can, however you want to look at it, it's an attempt to separate out. We decided to use an assigned beginning balance for funds that, as it says, are assigned by the Board of Education. And separate that out from your regular budget so you you'd have a way to track it.
Because that's committed to things, right?
At the pleasure of the board, that's basically what it is, yes. So if we look at table C on page 3, that's the first place it shows up. And if you look in the tentative budget column at the bottom where it says assigned beginning balance, it's $4,366,419. Okay?
And why is it different from the assigned in the draft budget? Did we assign something?
I mean, I'm going to make the assumption that since the draft budget stage, Ms. Hicks, that there has actually been some expenditures against that. Okay. And so it shows up, in the first place it shows up on the expenditure side is table F. Page 6 down at the bottom, we use the term board-directed expenditures. And basically moving forward, each time you see that, those two numbers should be exactly the same. Okay? And we did note that the funds here would be expended as, we've had discussions at the draft budget stage, through 3,300 community service, which I understand that's currently how you deal with it, but through object code 800, so it would show up if there's anything spent. But the bottom line is, from my vantage point, if you don't like it, just do what you usually do. Tell me you don't like it, and we'll try something else. But the concept and the idea was that way you would always, by separating it out, you would always know in your budget what the contingency really was. It wasn't assigned. The same with your beginning balance. That's why we use the term unassigned beginning balance. Because when you add the two numbers together, you come to the number that's in the Munis report, for example. Now, in the tentative budget Munis document, it won't separate it out, but reports that allow you to track it on a monthly basis, it will break it out. And you'll see an assigned beginning balance and an unassigned beginning balance. So that was just an effort to kind of try to help everyone collectively stay on the same page about this is, at this point, this is where it's projected to be. When we get to the working budget, if anything else occurs in this remainder of this fiscal year, then that number would drop to reflect that.
It's just keeping that one, the unassigned is kind of like your money that it's always there. I mean, you can get to it at any time.
So that was the rationale. Okay.
That makes sense. I figured it was something along those lines.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just think it's clunky.
Well, I can appreciate that. It probably is clunky in a way.
I'm okay with that, because that's money that's spent already. And we need to take that off the table,
So-
so.
You know,
I appreciate it.
I always appreciate suggestions on how we can deal with it, but I won't belabor the point and argue the point. I understand what you're telling me. What it's designed to do is for everyone to see those numbers.
Without having to do
Without having
other
to
sets of
manually-
numbers to figure it out.
To do the math.
And then to equate it to our old contingency, compare apples and apples, basically add those two numbers together
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
to compare it to contingency that we track.
Ms. Heisel, I always appreciate comments. Other questions at this point?
My biggest other question, well, I guess two, is I would like to get details of what makes up the expense portion of the budget. And I think that's something, unfortunately, that some staff is out right now. But before I can really feel good about endorsing this budget, I'd like to see the
Like to
details.
see the detail?
I was part of the, let's see, about 8 years ago, the budget committee, and this folder right here is the paperwork we developed as part of that process. And we've got about a quarter of an inch thick paper now.
Well, the Munis report, through the Munis system, you can generate as much detail as you would like. What I try to do with the narrative is just get basically kind of at a little higher level, not get too deep into everything. But I can appreciate your interest in wanting to look at the detail. And as soon as we get the major arm of this operation back here that can help with that, I think the information will be there and won't be a problem to provide.
Well, hopefully we'll have some opportunities between now and the end of June or July, the mid-July or something like that, to take the time to go through these on an item-by-item basis. I understand, we have state law that requires us to go ahead and make another attempt at the budget, but certainly from my standpoint, I think this is really just an estimated budget.
Well, I think we all, let's try to be real straightforward on it. When you're developing a budget, it's a guide, it's a roadmap. Things can jump up, and you have to deal with them, and it can make your budget move left or move right. I think you understand that with your background. Things can occur. In terms of what this budget does at this point, I think you should feel pretty good about it. You got a good starting point. If we want to go back and start kind of working our way through some of it, but we're still on target for what we think the number of students that are going to show up for enrollment. We took another look at that in April, and there wasn't much movement off of the numbers we looked at in February when you staffed schools. We took another look at ADA. You'll notice in table we've had a slight dip in expected seat dollars, and that kind of shows up it's not the total reason for the dip in table B under general fund. But we did look at ADA, and it was running lower. So we had Mr. Christie and Ms. Ellis and I decided to use a lower ADA number in the tentative budget than we used in the draft budget. If it bumps back up, then that'll be reflected at the end of the year when the superintendent's annual attendance report is filed. And that becomes the official number. So if it bumps back up,
When did you all make the adjustment?
we made it in April as we've started to prepare the tentative budget, but we took a look in April. As I discussed and indicated that we would when we were talking about the draft budget and the school allocations. So, the good news is we don't see, at this juncture, don't see any dip in enrollment. We just saw a dip in this year's average daily attendance, and it could have just been a bad period. And by the time school ends, at the end of the week, it could be tilting the other direction even.
Except spring break happened.
Miss X, that's, you're probably, I won't, that does have an impact, you're right.
So on the seat calculation, I guess the first thing I want to make sure that I clearly understand is that the ADA calculation is not based upon a projection for next year, but our seat dollars would be based upon the ADA that we realize for this year.
Correct.
So next year's money is based upon the prior year's ADA.
Average daily attendance.
Okay.
And it is certified by the department and the district both. And so at this point, what we're using is a projection. But when we call it the SAR report, Superintendent's Annual Attendance Report, when that's certified by the Department of Education, then that becomes the official number that you place into the seat allocation program, and that is a driver. There are several drivers on that, and I know you commented a couple of times when I've been around that you've worked with that formula, the spreadsheet I sent to you. And you can check KDE's website, because we look at that and use a lot of information there. The latest information that the department posted, the real numbers there are the December 1 child count numbers. I think it mentioned that in a cover memo that I received. When school's out and the SAR report's certified, then another concrete number gets put into the formula, which is like this year's average daily attendance number. In August, when we get tax information, assessment information, then it's certified, and that becomes a real concrete number. So then we're down to two other real important variables, and that is what is your at-risk number which is based on this year. That usually starts showing up as a concrete number in late September. The department issues an updated C calculation, but it comes very late in September, usually, and most districts have already moved forward with their working budget. Then the final piece that on a real number doesn't occur until late September to early March, and that's your transportation reimbursement. I understand that there was, for example, there was some discussion recently about a reduction in the current year's SEEK allocation by about $160,000. Well, the bulk of that, quite frankly, was about $115,000 less in transportation than we were estimating. We do the best we can, which is just carry forward the previous year's number until the department certifies what the transportation allocation for each school district is. And it's a fairly complicated formula that they use. But unfortunately, for probably the last 10 years, the total state allocation for transportation reimbursement has been flat. So every year, one thing I can kind of count on in most cases is going to be less this year than it was the previous year.
Transportation costs go up, and the reimbursement is less.
Reimbursement's flat.
So, that's just a cost that you then you're picking up a pretty heavy clip, basically through other parts of your revenue stream. You can usually say we're picking it up with local receipts, or we're picking it up with our other SEEK receipts. But the bottom line is, if your cost is $3 million and you're being reimbursed at $1.5 million, you're picking up the other 1.5 somewhere. Okay? So as those numbers become solid, so the reality of that one, that exercise on SEEK is that we don't really know exactly what that final number is going to be for the current year until it was late February this year. But we're usually pretty close, and sometimes that's as good as you can get. If we look at Table B very carefully, these are the 5 funds that we track, and you can see that the difference between the draft budget and the tentative budget, you can see the changes across those 5 funds. Table C.
Can you back up to Table A?
Sure, I'm sorry, we can do that. Table A is a comparison of the current working budget to what we project the tentative budget to be.
Okay. There's some pretty big negative changes there.
Yes.
Can you go through those?
Yes, there are. Now we're expecting the special revenue fund to increase. Because the caveat we always use is we try to only put in the tentative budget what we're reasonably sure is when we've got notification of. You know, you got to be real careful. You don't want to put something in here and you get a letter that says, "So sorry, but you're not getting a significant grant that you've received in the past." I mean, one of the things that's out there, I think all of you have probably heard little bits and pieces the past couple of days. They're getting ready to release the federal budget from the President's budget office. And one of the things we'll be watching closely is what's in there in terms of increases or decreases as it relates to public education. And then that filters down to the state of Kentucky, who then filters it down to us in Clark County. And it takes a while, because part of what also factors into this is the federal fiscal year runs October to September, October 1 to September 30. We operate on a fiscal year of July 1 to June 30, so some things lag a bit. But yes, there is some changes there. But we anticipate that the special fund will pick up as we move along, and when we get to the working budget stage, would anticipate that that will be much closer. Okay?
So the reasons, can you itemize the reasons for the general fund difference?
Well, a big piece of that is if we look at table C real quickly, you see the 46,861,
Right.
879 at the bottom. A big piece of that is the 4.3. Okay. But
So what's the other million?
well, another change, if you recall, part of what's involved here, if you recall, in the draft budget, we took out about $1.8 million worth of special projects that you put into the 16-17 budget. We took them out. We do that every year when we do the draft budget. So that would be a difference. In other words, at this point, we're not planning. There was an appendix C in the draft budget at the very end.
Yeah, it's not in this one, it's not in this.
No, I didn't bring, I brought it. And then we'll
List through the thing.
have it passed around. Remember, we talked.
Yes,
about this.
I have it.
Okay,
The
very
growth
good.
teachers and.
Yes. Those are things that were placed into the.
Oh, and these were the things that we bought
Yeah.
that reflected this year rather than
Yes,
next
ma'am.
year. The Lexia and
Yes, ma'am.
all those, yes.
So, those were pulled out when we did the draft budget. So that would, in 16-17, they're in that budget. In the 17-18 tentative budget, they're not. They're gone. So that would be a reduction in the expected, both on the revenue side and the expenditure side, because it was one-time dollars.
Just to be clear, those are one-time dollars and not recurring dollars.
Yes.
That they're not a hole that's not provided for.
Correct.
Okay?
Yes. That was a deliberate action. We did it. And we knew what we were doing when we did it. And that was a very deliberate action prior to the draft budget, as we prepared the draft budget to take them back out, because we knew they were all paid one-time dollars. So we move through table B, and it compares your tentative and draft and tentative. Table C is a closer look at the general fund. And so there's some slight, at the end of the day, a slight decrease in the general fund. So any specific additional questions on the revenue side?
Did you spend any time yourself looking at the projection of interest on investments?
No, I didn't, Mr. Heisel. What I look at is I look at the monthly reports to see how it's kind of how, what the investment, in, the interest that is received off of the district's accounts that's placed in the interest. And basically what the department, the guidelines that the department likes for you to follow in areas like interest is to be pretty conservative. So, I kind of usually expect it to be at the end of the year, pretty much I usually would expect it to be be higher than 75,000 that's in the budget. It's also one of those things that probably, the other thing I am not familiar with is what does your contract call for with your depository. In other words, in some contracts, it floats. It can vary from month to month. My assumption is that you're pretty competitive when you do that. You take all the requests for proposals you can get your local banks, which I assume is what you primarily use. You do everything you can to entice requests for RFPs or requests for proposals and work with them to get the best rate that you can on those investments. But most school districts traditionally have utilized banks within the county for that. I haven't looked at the latest report, but I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't, the year-to-date isn't higher than the budget.
You would be correct. Yeah, so I hope we will see a positive development there.
Yeah. I mean, they tend to follow kind of the same vein that the local bank that I deal with that pays me a 0.110 on my savings account. But they don't.
They got us a little better than that.
Okay, good deal on that. But I mean, there was a day, and it's not, of course, that way anymore. But you could with the kind of dollars that you have in your budget and dollars that flow through, it would generate a considerable sum of money for you. But you could probably up that a little bit. But I would rather you have in above the mark than substantially below the mark, because then that's basically dollars we got to figure out how to make up from some other direction, as opposed to having a few more at the end of the fiscal year, one-time dollars that can be utilized moving forward. The other item before we move on, that I think is important, the budget is based on the current tax rate of 62.2 cents per 100. It is using the assessment projection, so I'll be real anxious. I'm always anxious to see when the Department of Education sends us the certified assessment values, see how close that is to the mark. We did factor in a slight increase in assessments, expect them to be up by about 0.91%, so it's a little less than 1%. When we look at expenses, Table D, you've got, first thing we look at is, okay, what's going to be your debt service for the year, your principal and interest payments. That's going to be $3,280,483. We look at what's the projected recurring revenue coming into your capital outlay fund and your building fund, and we expect that to be $4,240,438. So you have some uncommitted funds of almost $1 million that is there. Okay. Now, from that uncommitted amount, that's where you would, if the district's considering any future bonding, that's where those dollars would come into play. Your fiscal agent is who you'd want to, who you'd be talking to very diligently. What would something like that support in terms of bonding capacity? My limited approach and conservative approach is I just use a factor of 10, because I can remember that math's pretty easy, but basically $959,000 would with a factor of 10 would bond about $9.5 million. It's probably closer to a factor of 12 or 13, maybe even a little higher. That's why I always encourage districts to have a very good working relationship with their fiscal agent. So you call them up and say, you know, they've gotten very good. They can send that to you almost in a matter of minutes now. But that's, you know, that's an important relationship, because if you're looking at, as I assume you are, looking at the pictures across the way, some pretty good projects. It's coming soon. Your allocations on page 5, your allocations to councils. Your section 4, section 5, which are your certified staff and your support staff, are above, you know, as we discussed in February, exceed the minimum requirements. Your section 6 allocation for supplies exceeds the $100 minimum. Just for the record, there will be 3.5% of the base of $3,981, which is $139.34 per student in average daily attendance. Okay? Table E looks at projected personnel expenses. It's my understanding that we built into this the improvements that you made to your salary schedule regarding step increases, adjustments, however we wish to phrase those. But it does not contain any across the board adjustments.
Just to recap, I guess, for people who maybe didn't note that at the time, the changes you all made in December, what were those specific percentages that the previous board made in September to the salary schedules?
When we first started talking about
Well,
doing.
no, what was actually passed, or maybe it was November, I'm sorry, I'm getting my months confused. Back in the fall, you all did like a 1% and a 5%? October.
Took
Yeah,
effect October 29th.
So in October, they did a 1% across the board for certified, and was it 5% for classified? Or-
I think forward.
It was 2 and 4.
It was
2 and 4, I believe.
So we probably ought to just confirm what that is. So that obviously stays in place. And then we also did step increases. We did targeted increases back 2 or 3 months ago to our pay schedules to make them more competitive also. So I think both those things put us in a much more competitive position. And naturally, we're not proposing to unwind those, so those will stay in place for the next year's budget.
It was 3% for certified and 4% for classes.
And that was done last fall already.
Yep, October.
Okay.
That was,
So in terms of the,
and that was for this year's
Right.
salaries. Okay,
Right.
I thought you were talking about, because we first started talking about something other than step increases in here for this year, but we didn't do
Now,
that.
I just wanted to clarify that
was last
because, you know, if you look at the news feed, we have other boards that, you know, are maybe doing increases right now to their pay schedules, and we actually, I think, we're already ahead of the curve on that and already did increases in 2 different steps
Those were
this
for
year.
this route. Well, depends on how you look at it. We were about 3 or 4, 5 months late in doing that.
Yeah, I will-
Because they didn't get the full year's benefit out of it. The salary schedules you're seeing most people put in now are for next year, so they will read the entire, and our step increases we have here, these will take effect when we start the new salary schedule in July. And those, that 2% and 4% that you're talking about, those were, because we
3 and
didn't do
4.
anything.
3 and 4.
3 and 4, we didn't do anything back in the summer like we're doing now
Right.
for this current year.
So what's included in this budget is the 3% and the 4% we passed back in
that became a part of your salary.
That's-
And the smooth out of the step increases. So all that is built into
It is.
this.
Yes, sir.
And then our normal step increases. You
Well,
know,
the
as
normal-
people, as staff,
Normal
you
will
know,
change with the-
well, you know, as people go from, I don't know,
Yeah.
from year 7 to year 8, that's just
That's
part
it.
of our
You've
salary.
accounted bumping everybody up for a year in the experience.
All that's-
Yes.
all
So
that
that's
is-
accounted.
The, I think it's, you know, the portion of your general fund budget committed to personnel is about 82%, and I find that in an acceptable range. So, I
And
think you're
if you go back and look at that, if you put that contingencies back together,
that committed back in
number
there.
will drop down to back down to that much below that 80%.
It
So
would.
that number is a little bit inflated because you've taken part of that contingency out. That makes that number appear higher. If you put all the contingency back into one, you're going to see that
Now what?
percent of general fund drop back down.
If we, okay, let's go.
Well, that,
You remember earlier discussion, we took a piece out and we said we're gonna call this the assigned
Yes.
beginning balance, and then we have a piece that we say board directed expenditures. If you added that back, if you added those numbers back into your quote total beginning balance and your total contingency, it would lower the portion of that total that's attributed of the budget to personnel costs. All I'm saying is at 82, you're still fine. It might drop it down to 80. We're in a good range right there at 82.
I think our number in the working budget this past year is like 73, 75, somewhere in there.
So I mean, what we're trying to set up is that inside of the working budget itself. Now here's a hard number, what the unassigned contingency is. And in this one, it's $7 million. If we look at table F and we look at the tentative budget and go down and find the contingency line. And it does, back to your phrase, look a little clunky, but I think it will be helpful as we move forward because, you know, you have plans for what's down here. This 7 million is a true contingency set aside for whatever need might come along or whatever decision the board would make. And that's fine. I mean, I think you kind of got somewhat like the best of both worlds. You've got the ability to do some very deliberate, targeted, board-directed expenditures, and at the same time, you're not worrying about its impact on a hard, solid contingency. That's my look at it. But if you look at table F, you'll see some differences, some swings if you look at the dollar change. But what I would ask in many cases, keep in mind that in the 16-17 budget, we've got that $1.8 million in one-time expenditures in that budget. And we took them out in the draft budget. So when we compare current year to the tentative, some of those numbers are going to could pose questions as to why. Well, we can get to why. Appendix C, for example, from the draft budget answers a lot of those questions. Okay? Now, table G just takes a look at the difference between what we looked at the draft budget in January and the tentative budget today in table on page 7, and you can see some other adjustments that have occurred. Now, what I think is real, I think one of the reasons I want to commend the board in terms of this report, I think personally I've looked at it very thoroughly. It's solid. I don't know all the nitty gritty, but the numbers add up like they should. You've got, $7 million, what's it represent of your total budget? 11.7%. That's a good solid number. It takes care of any cash flow issues you might have, and I think Ms. Ellis demonstrated at some point last year that, starting kind of in July, August, September, October, our cash kind of dips because all we have coming in is state seat dollars. Then in November, usually you start getting a boost from your local revenue sources. So that kind of, that helps significantly. But the aspect that I'm very pleased about your budget at this stage of development is you actually have a structurally balanced budget. You have $366,000 of recurring revenue at your disposal. And I can assure you that there are boards meeting tonight that do not have that problem. And if you look at table I on page 9, you can see that the adjustments from the draft budget. Our overall Our unassigned beginning balance is down slightly, but the most important number to me is actually you've been able to lower projected expenditures by almost $350,000 from the draft budget stage. So I think it's at this stage, a good, strong, balanced budget. And you've got some maneuvering room moving forward. Now, I'll make every effort, to the best of my ability, to address any final questions you've got.
My questions are more the nuts and bolts, so we'll
I
have to
understand.
defer those till later on.
But those can be, you've got, we don't deal with the working budget, as you know, Mr. Heisel, in September, so we got plenty of time, I think, to look through the nuts and bolts on it.
I mean, but since our budget year starts at the beginning of July,
Yes.
I'd like to be able to get to that sooner than later, so people have an idea of what sort of money they're dealing with. That was
My sense is as soon as the finance director returns, that can be accomplished.
Hey, you'll touch on some of the things that allowed us to reduce expenses. Because if you're looking at the bottom line on table I, revenues are down, but expenses are down significantly more.
I think if we look at table G, you had some reductions, for example, in salary costs, which I'm going to attribute to
73.56%.
some adjustments, some changes. Your employee benefits, I think we just probably sharpened the pencil and did real well. Maybe got a tighter estimate.
Workers'
What
comp.
we think. Maybe got some good pricing. Workers' comp is like just roll the dice. One year it's down, the next year it goes way up.
Not ours is going to be going down.
Going down.
I'm glad to hear that, Scarlett. But I mean, it's not unusual. And of course, it's all predicated on what your experience is. My experience at one point in my career as a superintendent had a bad year, and the rates went up accordingly the next year. So when that happens, you bring in all the safety people you can muster and go through the steps and get everyone kind of back on it. And if your experience drops, then the rate drops. So it's a good thing. It's a real good thing. So you can see that you had more substantial reductions that totaled where you actually reduced expenses, and you had increases in expenses. But there was adjustments, and there'll be adjustments from the tentative to the working budget, most likely, that will occur. And so those, I think Mr. Christie, we tried to be as prepared as we could be, and we're not. Wish I could say I was as knowledgeable as Miss Ellis about the Clark County budget, but I'm knowledgeable about it at the level I am asked to deal with it at. And it's a good budget. It's put together. I don't think come June 30, 2018, there's going to be much variance from where these total budget numbers are. Because we look at that every summer. Do a comparison of what the working budget called for in terms of expenditures, receipts. Compare that to what the annual financial report tells us actually happened, and look at the variance in those things. And that has an impact on how, in many cases, what the working budget looks like if there's some substantial variances. So, I mean, you got some I think you got some more than adequate checks and balances on it. But I think if you want to look at the detail, we can make that happen. Any final questions?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bond.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, other discussion or questions on the munis budget?
As a procedural standpoint, I'll just emphasize that we're still just using a broad brush here, and it's incumbent upon us to go back and to get familiar with the details of what's behind it before we get very far into the next fiscal year. Because I think only fair to the people that are relying on this budget, you know, the principals and staff and everybody else that, you know, would be potentially impacted by supply issues or contracting services, et cetera, to make sure we've gone over all that. So I don't want us to just prove it now and not look at the thing again until September. That would be a boo-boo. That's another technical term. Thank you, sir.
What is the status of the Budget Finance Committee? What's their?
When Alicia comes back, she'll set the meeting date.
There hasn't been a meeting yet?
Her father passed away right when the meeting was supposed to be. And then she's had her baby, so. And she will be back very soon.
Okay. All right, other discussion? And the final pieces of the puzzle before, outside of looking at detail on revenues and expenses are, let's see, so the big unknowns is final year ADA, final assessed property value, of course, tax rate. Those are probably the three big variables that we don't control. We can control the tax rate, but we don't control the assessment, we don't really control the ADA, so. Okay. All right, other discussion? If not, a motion is in order to consider adoption of the 2017-2018 tentative budget as presented.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Mr. Peridot,
Second.
second by Ms. Hicks. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
That motion carries 3-1 with Mr. Peridot, Ms. Hicks, and Dr. Kudak in favor, and Mr. Heisel opposed, and Ms. Ritchie absent. All right, next up is item number 3, consider discussion and modification of the 2017-2018 salary schedules. Taking her scarf off.
It's brought back again, as your request from last time.
Okay,
We voted the table,
right.
and then we're looking at it again. I think as we talked about before, this one reflects sort of a step increase that's every year. We don't have those big chunks of years with no step increase.
Right.
If we do this one, it's included in the budget already.
That was probably the biggest question we had. So. And no other changes from what we have discussed in previous.
Nothing's changed from what we discussed before.
I want to make sure I'm not under the incorrect impression. The salary schedule that was in the packet, that's the same thing, this exact same salary schedule.
Except for the approval we had last meeting for GRC to have the
Right.
band increments.
Right.
And
Okay, that's the only change.
That's the only change.
Okay.
So what's being requested tonight?
We just talked, when you talked about it, we wanted to bring it back one last time to see if there was any other special things you wanted to do to it. If you, Mr. Heisel had even mentioned, the changes here in the steps didn't reflect any change in the 0 through 4 years. You'd said something about that, so we just, you just had to put it back on the agenda, so if you wanted to make any changes or any other additions, if you wanted to target any areas.
I would like to look at possibly giving a 1% raise. And also, I would like to target, at least with our bus drivers, I think that is a huge area for us, and one that we get hit with really, really tough at the first year, being able to find drivers out there. And I would say, and I don't know this garbage, I'm talking off the top of my head just from our discussions, that's probably the toughest area we have in hiring. And when you go and drive into other counties like I do, you have the school buses sitting outside just like we do at Campbell saying hiring bus drivers, and most of them are starting at $14, $15 an hour. And I would like to see our starting drivers now. And I know that there's a lot of other needs or whatever there, but this is supply and demand as far as I'm concerned. We need to try to get the best. When you think about it, you know, from a school supervision part, a bus driver is your only classified position that is directly in charge of supervising children for an hour, 2 hours of the day.
By himself.
And any other time, I don't care if you're, you know, if you're a custodian, if you're a cook or whatever, I'm not saying you don't help out, but there are certified people supervising and helping out those things. I just think it's an important job. I
There's
think we
another-
tie our hands to people that are hiring them when we don't offer as much as we can, and I'm afraid we lose good people out of Clark County.
Another point is they max at 30 hours per week. So, and you've got custodians, you know, that they're 40
Right.
and 181 days a year. So they're limited there as well.
Had we looked into any of the cost of that, Mr. Christie, of giving maybe, what were we looking at, a $1 raise or something
Well,
across the board
to get to
on
the
that?
14, it would be $1.26 for a starting bus driver with 0 years. It would be $1.26. I can tell you what I did. I looked at bus drivers and took their first year, and to get them to the 14, that would be $1.26 per hour increase to get them to the $14 an hour.
Or how many drivers?
That would be for a total of about 24 to 28 total with the subs, 28 drivers. Now, once you get to the second year, there's a little bit of a step increase, so that $1.26 then would drop to an 86 cent. So what I figured was calculated what it would take to get your drivers to start their first year at 14, and they would remain at 14 until their 5th year, and in the 5th year, they would move to 14,
07.
1407, is that what it was?
Mhm. But instead of
Yeah.
starting at 1274, they would be for those
Start at
first 4
14.
years.
Usually it would be 14 for 4 years.
4 years,
Yes.
yes.
How many bus drivers you say we have again?
We have about 60, but only about 24, 28 of them fall in this category. I calculated that with the at the 30 hours and with the benefits, that would be a cost to you at about $35,600, $35,657 per year.
Plus benefits.
That's including benefits.
On the 30 hour, which then backs into 6 hours a day, and looking at other districts, some of them quote 5 hours, some quote 4. Is that 6 hours a maximum, or do they
It's
get
max.
a total of 6
It's
hours?
a maximum, and
Depending on the route length, I guess it is? So if you're doing the run out
We
in the
try to
eastern part of the
equalize
county,
them where
you,
they're all, try to equalize them as much as we can, but it's a 6-hour max. Some of them might only work 5.5.
well, like comparison, if you look at Bourbon County, stick with 4 hours is what's on their list, and Boyle County is also 4 hours. And so, the difference between getting 4 hours and 6 hours is going to make a big difference.
Do try to use them for the 6 hours to do the
Yeah,
maintenance
they're
on their
used for-
buses and clean their buses. and-
So does Bourbon at 4 hours not do that?
Maybe they have, I don't know, I'd have to look at their routes. Do they have more drivers and shorten their routes where they have a higher number of drivers so they can work on less hours? That's a variable.
Mhm.
I could shorten them, we could shorten hours too.
Well,
if we had more routes.
It was a question, because if you look at hourly rates, our starting rate's $12.74, Powell's $11.35, Montgomery's $12.45, so that's both less than us. Now, Bourbon is $15.85, but if you do the 4 hours, then their bus drivers end up making less money. So that's
I don't
kind of an
know how many
oddball
routes-
thing
I
out
don't know how many
there.
routes they have. I really don't know how many
And
routes
you
they have.
probably don't know if they're doing special runs or overtime from that 4 hours. You would have to look at their budget specifically to see how that's working out, because I would venture to say that they're probably getting more hours than 4 hours.
I don't know. So we're all,
So do ours, when our folks drive for groups, is that within their 6 hours?
No, they're all.
If it falls within that day, I guess it would be, would it not be?
Well, any trips, they're paid as trip drivers. They're paid as a trip driver. That's the outside of their extra hours. That's a trip. Now, what we have to do is we still, even with their trips, we keep them below 40 hours, because then you get into an overtime thing. If they, even between trips and the regular routes, they hit over 40 hours, that's overtime.
So how does
each-
Bourbon County get around
I
that?
don't know. Each of our drivers, we don't let them get over 40 hours.
Because
We
if they
schedule
go,
the trips and everything
if-
around that.
if they go 30 to 40, that's not overtime. So our drivers, if they get above 30, I don't know how Bourbon does it. I would,
But if they're only doing 4 hours a
That
day,
gives
then
them
they
more.
could still get lots of school trips before they get 40 hours.
But
And-
you have 60 drivers competing for those trips, so they're not very frequent. Drivers.
I took a little different tack. Estill County is higher than we are, and of course it varies. You can't do it across the board to try to equate the thing, but if we try to match Estill counties, I calculated that would be $70,000.
What is what is Estill's hourly rate?
Would, of course, it varies every year,
Oh.
you know, so
They're
that would be.
starting for zero.
Well, that would be a 76 increase the first year, $1.11, 87 cents, 83 cents, 84 cents, 83 cents. And then in some years, it would only be a 68-cent differential.
See, what I did, I just took the $14 an hour and went as many years as I needed to on the current salary schedule to where their salary then went above 14, which means in their 5th year, they go above 14. So the way I'd calculated, the first year with zero experience was $1.26, and with 1 year's experience, it was an 86-cent an hour raise. With 2 years, it was 47 cents. With 3 years, it was 28 cents, and with 4 years, it was 9 cents. And that's for 20, that's actually, I calculated it on 24 drivers. That's what we have in the salary schedule, and then we have 11 at 0, 1 at 5 at 1 year, 2 at 2 years, 4 at 3 years, and 2 at 4 years.
I agree with Mr. Peridot, and probably the sense of other board members that just, without knowing what the market analysis is, just our gut tells us we need to do some adjustment there. But I'm reluctant today to want to move forward on it, but I think that hopefully coinciding with the same time frame where we're looking at the details of the budget in late June, early July, I'm hoping we can review this again and bring that topic back up and have a resolution on whether we can do anything on that before school starts.
I'm afraid we'll get stuck in the same thing we did last year. And we go and, you know, not a criticism of Dr. Bob, but we have a good conservative budget. And I feel good about that. I feel good about our budget that we're currently going through this year. And it looks to me, as everything we saw from our third quarter report, that we're going to have a good surplus left over at the end of this year as well. And I think we've got plenty of leeway, and what happened to us last year is that when we came in and looked at things, we said, well, we don't have enough for a raise or anything. And then all of a sudden we get into October and we do have money for a raise, but then we couldn't give it to the teachers because of issues that popped up during that time. We had to wait until the first of the year to give it to our people. And I really
No, it
believe
took
that-
effect October 29th.
We just couldn't back it up and
But
start.
we couldn't
couldn't
make it
back it up.
Couldn't back
retroactive.
it up to
We
the
did
start,
back it up.
went through that way, yes. Couldn't back it up. I don't want to get in that same position again. Again, I feel very confident about the bus driver. I feel very confident about a 1% raise for everybody. I don't have any issues with that whatsoever. I know it'll reflect with the numbers right there of, you know, looking like we're starting with a budget in deficit, but again, we are still a draft budget here. But I think, you know, that we, you know, last year we kind of sat on our hands. This year, you know, I think we need to be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to our salaries.
I'm fine with that, but I really want to know what that year-end ADA number is.
I agree.
I mean, now, I would be willing to schedule a work session just to talk about budget once we get that back. We have superintendent evaluation, we got a couple meetings, that's going to tie up some of June, so if you want to throw it in that, we can do that. If we want to do something end of June, first part of July, we can do that, but I really want to see what that ADA number is. I'm sorry I make a big deal out of that, but it's half our funding. So small numbers, small variances there can really has a big effect on the bottom line, so.
And you know, if you look at this at another viewpoint in terms of revenue, receipts, not revenues, the difference being the contingency are going down, expenses were up significantly last year, how to accomplish that. And I think part of it is because we're taking out a lot of capital investments over last year, and we're just assuming to not have this year's budget. So, again, I want to do it, but I want to see the numbers first, because the problem with something like raising pay is it's a recurring thing. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. But I don't want to put it off till October or November. I think a late June, early July timeframe.
Let me pose a question to Dr. Bob. Is there a sweet spot where we'll have a majority of the financial information available to make the decision before the start of the next school year?
Pretty much the end of June, first part of, kind of the timeframe, timeline is kind of like the last week of June through the first week of July, you would have information that's going to be pretty solid.
My thoughts on that is that school's going to get out on Friday. Teachers going to prepare their resumes on Monday. And they are going out and they're looking, and they're still looking back at us. And they're saying, well, our board may or they may not. I think, we built a healthy contingency that would catch any fallback that we would have for a one-year deal. I just think that it's time for us to step forward and say we're going to do this.
We've lost a lot to Fayette County this week.
Lost two today, 2 middle school teachers today.
Lost a principal, assistant principal.
And then when they pick up the Winchester Sun on Monday, the city board takes no action on teacher salaries.
We've got 26 certified positions posted right now, which is pretty big for this time for us.
And then we have, you do it now, and then you have another change at the end of the summer once those people start filling in the jobs from other places.
We don't have a payroll tax here. There's no feasible way we're going to be able to catch up with Fayette County.
Never think that you
No,
can
I don't
catch up
think
with
we're going-
Fayette County.
But we are positioned, and I think another analysis I did is what would it take in the first 10 years to get us to have the highest pay rate of any of the other surrounding counties. And we're almost there. We're $20,000 away from that. There's just a few changes we have to make, a couple $100 here, a couple $100 there. I mean, I'd be more than happy to propose that, but since we don't have the advantage of being able to actually run through the real numbers on it, I would be reluctant to do so. But I think for $20,000 more, we can make the statement based upon published salary levels that are out there right now. Again, not knowing what other boards might be doing tonight or this week. All the counties that touch us, except for Fayette, we can be the highest paying county out there. And I think that's where we're going to have to unfortunately draw from.
Any idea where we're losing our teachers to?
Fayette County.
All of them?
I'm really mad. I really feel like
I have a big
I'm
new school I have to
pretty
staff,
much.
so I mean.
It's not just high school. I
Yeah.
mean,
No, it's,
They keep talking about having to staff a new school, but those kids, they didn't just make those kids up. They're pulling those kids from another building, so they're either overstaffed in other buildings or they're not. if they're hiring
Fayette's
all
been
their
adding
staff.
5%
They let a lot of their
ADA
people
for
go.
years.
Yeah, they let them.
they're taking our people with experience. They're not taking our brand new teachers. They're
No,
taking
they're-
ours, they're middle of the road, around 10 years experience is where they're hitting.
There is a big difference between us and Fayette County, especially on the 27 year when we get there. But guys, that didn't happen overnight. If you go back and research the history of Clark County, you can see the years they never took the 4% back in there. They never, at that time, everybody accepted that you're gonna live in Clark County, you're gonna raise your family in Clark County, and this is the salary you're gonna get, and you can like it. And I will guarantee that the numbers that you look at in salaries 25 years ago were much closer percentage-wise than what they are right now. And that just continues to grow when we don't take the action to make that happen.
If we lose students next year, we're gonna lose staff. So, I mean, that's the way it goes.
So that, yeah. If Fayette's, their ADA is increasing, what, between 4% and 6% per year. It has been for the past couple of years. So, I mean, that new high school they're building is going to be full. It's not, okay, going to be full in 5 years. It's going to be full when they open it. So, there is just that degree of growth happening. Now, I don't know if that's sustainable because their housing market is such that there's no available inventory. So they may have physically reached the limit of how many people can live in Fayette County. So,
And the very good news is, I was looking at the zoning maps today and talking to people, we have a good inventory.
We have an excellent
of available
inventory of
land.
available
I mean,
houses.
land that doesn't, potentially has to be zoned, land that's ready to go right now.
yes, that is correct.
But again, we get boxed in on the tax rate. We've made a lot of progress in taking 4% over the years, and our rate is now, again, the highest, except for Fayette County, of any of our surrounding rates. We finally gotten to parity, which is a good thing. But we're going to be limited to how much we can move outside of that range without potentially affecting people who want to move here. It's a difficult conundrum to be in. The good news is, we've got a healthy contingency to, to be able to weather various storms, but we can rely on contingency to plug continual budget gaps on a recurring basis, because eventually we'll run out, we're upside down.
Yeah. Been in that situation before. So.
So I'll make a motion, we give a 1% raise to our certified salary and bring bus driver salaries up to the scale that Mr. Christie, to the $14 for the 4 years.
So 1% certified.
That would equate to about 200,000.
And then with that, with the bus driver, about 230.
About 40.
About 40.
What about the other classified?
I'm good with that right now, but right now it's a supply and demand as far as I'm concerned. If we're sitting here arguing over this point, I want to try to just give what I can. I know that bus drivers are tough.
Custodians to do the same
I
thing, to
don't
give
mind doing
custodians the same
anybody
dollar,
else or
26
looking
hour
there, so.
per hour increase would be 20,000.
If people support it, I'll amend my
Take
motion.
2 years, they would get 20, they would be at that salary for 3 years. That's a smaller number.
So you're looking at 230,000 for that motion, Mr. Christie, is that correct?
About 236.
So that's 1% certified raise for 200,000. Bus drivers increase for the first 5 years. And what was the number for that? 4 years?
About 35,600.
What was our cushion on our budget?
366.
366.
All right, motion's on the floor. Second. All right, no second. Motion fails for lack of a second. Any other discussion? Like I said, as board chair, I would be committed to having a special session to discuss this in the June, first part of July.
I think we need to keep the discussion open. We need to try. Just afraid we may have lost some people because of our inaction.
All right. Okay, any other discussion? All right, the motion is in order to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
All right, motion by Mr.
Second.
Heisel, second by, you're not Ms. Ritchie, you're Ms. Hicks. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 4-0 with Ms. Ritchie absent, and we're adjourned at 7:08 p.m. Thank you.
Keep looking back there.
No, it's back here now.
I talked to the ones that you all went, that you saw at the KSBA conference, the PR marketing people. I've met with them. I'd like for you to pick some dates in early June that you all would be available.